Have you ever wondered what it's like to bring theater across the country to young audiences all around the United States? My name is Kent, and this is your half-hour call.
Good evening, friends. This is your half-hour call, please. Half hour. Thank you.
What is up, my friends? Today, I was able to sit down with Ruth E. Kramer and talk about exactly what it takes to be a stage manager on a Theater for Young Audiences tour. And stick around to the end of the video where Ruth will share exactly what kind of people make great stage managers for TYA tours. But if this is your first time here, welcome. My name is Kent, and you are watching Half-Hour Call, where we're dedicated to shining the spotlight on technical theater. So if you want how-to videos, interviews with industry leaders like you're watching right now, and insider theater updates, make sure you hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you never miss another video. That's enough for me. Let's dive into that interview. Well, thank you so much, Ruth, for joining me again. I'm excited to get to talk to you all about TYA tours, Theater for Young Audiences tours.
Sure. What would you like to start with?
Well, how did you find these Theater for Young Audiences tours? How did you get started with that?
It started, again, through people I knew. The year or two after I got my equity card, I was hired to go on the road with a company that no longer exists called Maximilian Productions. And they were friends of friends. We were all sort of in the same circle. I was first hired to go out on the road with them. A very, very simple tour with very few costumes and very little scenery and not a full schedule. But after that, again through a different set of friends, I got an interview with TheatreWorks USA here in New York, where I worked for many, many years as a stage manager, an assistant director, and then as a director remounting and restaging tours to go out, as well as stage managing in-town workshops and what they called mini tours, which toured locally when they were doing new shows. I got into it thinking I wasn't going to stay long, and then I stayed a long time. I think I stayed longer than people do now, but it was a simpler time. I'm talking about the mid-'80s to mid-'90s.
So what was your favorite part of working in Theater for Young Audiences tours? If you had to pick one part or one aspect of the job that you really enjoyed.
Knowing that you're bringing up the audience of tomorrow. And when you hook an audience in, you know you're changing their lives. Just like my life was changed when I saw theater as a child. You know that even if they're not going to go into theater, which most of them aren't, that at least they understand that stories can be told live in front of their eyes, and that there can be a magic. To me, it was everything, performing for children and for young people. Some of the most rewarding being when you're performing for young teens who don't like anything. I don't like anything. And then they get hooked into it. Again, I like the variety. I loved going all over the country and seeing different places and different things, and then returning to sites I had been to before, and knowing the town or knowing the stagehands or knowing the restaurants, which are a very important part of TYA touring.
I think it's so important to expose young people to this art form because it's nothing
Absolutely.
else is like it.
And it's the imagination and the play of children, who put on their own plays and become characters and become directors of other children in their garages or their barns or out in their backyards. It's fun to think that maybe I was part of inspiring some of that. That was the best part, that is the best part of TYA for me, is knowing that you're growing a future audience so that commercial theater and nonprofit theater can continue to be here.
On the flip side, what were some of the most unique challenges that you faced in Theater for Young Audiences touring? I feel like it's a very specific skill set.
And the TheatreWorks model that existed when I did it was very specific. You rehearsed in New York, and then you got into a van with 5 actors, and the set, and the costume, and the sound equipment, and all your luggage, and you left town. And you stayed in motels, and you go to schools or auditoriums, and The actors and you as the stage manager are the ones to load in all the equipment, even though each sponsor or presenter is supposed to supply people to help you. Sometimes the insurance policies forbid that. Sometimes it's an IA house and you get stagehands who help you a lot and then you can't touch anything. You can only describe to them how to do it. And sometimes you get stagehands who aren't union and you can collaborate with them. But it's a unique situation to have actors carrying scenery and props and sound equipment and costumes down hallways and upstairs. And although most of the companies I worked with did it with great humor, I think there's a generation today that doesn't necessarily want to do that too much. I don't know. I haven't done this in years. But that was unique. That was very unique. And then you get back in the van and you drive maybe 7 hours to your next stop. So you're pretty much with people, the same people 24/7. They are your colleagues, they are your family, and if you don't get along, that can be really problematic and make for some unhappiness. The moments that you're performing are also unique and different because you're on a different stage every day, and sometimes you're not on a stage. Sometimes you're shown to the gym and told the kids are going to sit on that side, so you sit up on that side. And there's no proscenium, there's no wings. I mean, we used to facilitate costume changes by one actor holding a blanket up in front of another actor. These aren't easy situations. Then the next day you're on a stage, but the wings are full of risers and podiums and other things they use. So how do you make it safe? Do you cut scenery? Do you change entrances and exits? As you do the show more and more and more, and I think I did 100 performances of one of them, as you've done the show and you learn it, you can walk into a space and you can go, I know how we're doing the show today. We've done this before on a stage this tiny, or this enormous, or this shallow. And everyone can go, yeah, remember that place we did the show before? We can do that here. Great, let's just do it. But it takes some figuring out. You're in a situation every day where you've been told certain things about the space when you advance it, and you walk in and some of those may not be true at all. So that's unique. It's a way of life you have to love. And you have to love performing for the kids because it's difficult. You're out on tour basically doing one-night stands for the most part and not staying in 4-star hotels and sharing the drive-in and doing the physical labor.
It sounds, in terms of like the working with your team, it sounds like it's very similar to cruise ships where you hope that everyone it's a life you have to love specifically, and you hope that everyone gets along, and that can kind of make or break the experience, is what it sounds like.
It totally can. I mean, many people do it for the equity card.
Mm-hmm.
Many people do it for the health insurance. And they're not necessarily married to the art form or to the show itself. And there are people who come into it and do it for other reasons and find they love it. Who find that working with children is a wonderful experience. There's also, you're away from the home base of the company. There's also a sense of independence about it that I always loved. I mean, the very first time I did TYA was in 1985, and there were no computers, there were no body mics or stage mics. I toured with a reel-to-reel tape deck and 2 speakers and a monitor that hooked up to this reel-to-reel tape deck. The monitor faced the actors, the 2 speakers sat on the side of the stage or the playing area, and it was very simple to set up. When I stopped doing TYA years later, there was a whole body mic setup at that point, which was much harder and took much longer to set up. And sound checks were much more difficult and took longer and added to our span of day. The first tour I took out in 1985, which was actually where I'm going, I didn't talk to the office for 9 weeks.
Wow. No
communication with the TheatreWorks office for 9 weeks. And they had always said to me, don't worry, if something goes wrong, the sponsor or presenter is going to call us and let us know. And they didn't worry about me, and I didn't worry about them. They weren't checking up on me. And there was a certain feeling of independence in that, and responsibility in that. And I think the actors thrived on it too, that no one was checking up on them all the time. I mean, eventually, of course, I had to have contact with the office, but we didn't send in performance reports at that point. And I was given, at the beginning of the 6-month tour, a check for $3,000, which I cashed, made into American Express traveler's checks, and kept in a waist pouch around my body for the entire tour. Such very different times. Now, of course, you get a company credit card, and you have to fill out an expense report for it every month. These were different times.
That level of freedom and the need to adapt to every theater. Is there anything that you feel like you've taken with you from the Theater for Young Audiences tours into everyday stage management at perhaps a more traditional theater setting?
It's that flexibility you have to have when you go into, when you're working regional theater, for example, and you're a regional theater stage manager. There has to be a flexibility about going into each theater, not necessarily for the physical plant, but for the way they do things in every different theater. You have to be able to fit into their culture and maybe hope that you can affect their culture a little before you leave. With touring TYA, it's much more about your flexibility for the physical situation you're walking into every day or every 2 days. That you have to be able to make instant or almost instant best decisions for the good of the show, that you're giving the audience the best show possible, and the safety and the good of the company. And it's very, very difficult when you're a stage manager and 5 actors out there. Sometimes the decisions are made by the stage manager. Sometimes they absolutely have to be made by the group. It teaches you flexibility. It teaches you decision making. It teaches you when you made the wrong decision in one place and walk into a similar situation and you know to make a different decision. It teaches you enormous flexibility, enormous responsibility to pull off a good quality show in a very different situation every day. It also teaches you how to do a show, because you don't carry understudies, how to do a show when you're feeling second best. I won't say when you're absolutely ill, because then you have to call out. But when you're feeling second best. Because for most cases, you can't on a TYA tour leave someone in bed at the hotel and then just leave them there and drive 7 hours to your next place. You have to figure out how to get them in the van or transport them with you to your next stop, whether they're performing or working or not at that next stop. And I don't know how that's going to change after COVID. That will be interesting to discover.
Yeah. I wonder if they'll add, I mean, of course, there's the whole transportation issue, but I wonder if they'll add like one swing, potentially something like that.
I don't know, but I don't know whether schools are going to be inviting companies in for the next couple of years anyway.
Right.
So I don't know what the future of touring children's theater is. Residential children's theater, of which there are several companies in the country, they have their own spaces, or they rent a space and they bring the kids to them. That's another thing after COVID, but it's much more like a regional theater than it is like touring children's theater. I don't know what the future holds for these companies that do their either day trips or tours where the company stays out overnight. I don't know what the future is for them at all right now.
Are there any common mistakes that you see people making when they go, or you hear of people making, since there's only one stage manager per show, when they go out on the road for the first time? And how can those mistakes be avoided?
Well, let's make sure when we say on the road, we're talking about touring children's theater, which is not like a national tour.
Right.
By any means. I think the common mistakes, it's a tough one, Kent. It's a tough one. I think the common mistakes are the mistakes we make in other arenas. Balancing improperly the demands of the producers with the personal personalities and needs of the performers. And it's even harder because there's physical labor involved, not just acting. And I know my common mistakes all had to do with pushing too hard when people didn't need to be pushed, where they had to do it on their own time and on their own terms. Mm-hmm. It's a very pressured situation when you're making people do manual labor. It's the toughest of situations to say, hey, actors, you're putting up your own set, you're managing your own costumes, you're putting those props away, you have to make sure all the props go into the bin before you close the bin, you can't just throw them in there, there has to be a checklist. Treating them like they're stagehands or assistant stage managers or a combination of both. Trying to switch the head and remember that they're actors doing this. They're not actually a stagehand doing this, I think is one of the more common mistakes, and I certainly made it myself. And it can be avoided by discussion, by training, and by relationships.
And what kind of people would make good candidates for this kind of touring situation, the Theater for Young Audiences tours? What kind of qualities in them would make them a good fit for these such tight quarters, such close proximity to people, all of that?
Lots and lots of patience, the understanding that everyone is different and everyone is going to respond to a difficult situation in a different way. Someone who has lots of support from wherever home is and whatever what home is. Someone who has a support system and friends that we can take with us virtually, like this, or on our phones, so that we remember that although you're on tour and that is your life at the moment, you have more to your life than just that. That your life is fuller than just the moment you had with that sponsor or that actor or that stagehand that maybe wasn't that pleasant a moment ago. Someone who loves to drive, someone who loves to see the country, someone who loves to experiment with food, someone who loves to check into a hotel and say, hey, I looked at the map and there's a blah, blah, blah 3 miles from here that none of us have ever seen. Let's go see it. And someone who's patient enough to know that not everyone's going to hop in the van after driving 5 hours to go see whatever tourist attraction or unique attraction you're talking about. Having the understanding that not everyone on your tour is the same. Having an interest outside yourself is very, very important on these tours. I found taking advantage of the places I was in, like passing through Gettysburg. We're passing through Gettysburg. Let's tour the battlefields. And then let's go on to our next stop. That did it for me. That was the reward for me, because I got to see things I would not have gotten to see otherwise. And then there were moments where the cast was like, no, we don't want to, just drive on. And an understanding of why and how that happens is very important. Also, your technical ability. When you are on a T-Way tour, you are all things. You are the sound guy. You are the lighting person. You are the fix the set consultant person. You have to have, or at least know your equipment well enough to be able to, I won't say repair it, but be able to improvise when something goes wrong. An ability to improvise, an ability to make a decision and stick with it and just go forward.
That's quite a bit on the shoulders of one person to be essentially the technical director and stage manager, and touring the country sounds really nice though. when you talk about it, like taking advantage of where you are.
It was one of the joys for me, certainly.
Well, do you have anything else you'd like to say to people who might be interested in Theater for Young Audiences touring or stage managing in general?
I'm going to just talk about stage managing for Theater for Young Audiences. Know what you're getting into before you do it. And if you say yes, do it as cheerfully as you possibly can. We all have bad days. We all have down days. We all have days where things aren't going our way, know that that's not necessarily going to be the next day or the day after that. One day at a time, and really try and love the people you're with on those tours. Find something about everyone that you love or like. You may not like or love everything about them, but find something about everyone to appreciate and hope that they'll give you the same consideration. That's what gets you through.
Well, thank you so much, Ruth, for talking to everybody about Theater for Young Audiences tours. It was wonderful to get to talk to you. And thank you so much for liking, commenting, and subscribing. My name is Kent, and this has been your Half Hour Call. Find the perfect gift for the stage manager in your life at the Half Hour Call store. Now with free shipping on all domestic orders. New products added frequently. Visit KentJamesCollins.com/store to shop now.